Call the meeting to order for the Economic Development Committee for July 22nd at 5 p.m. You stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, guys. I'd like to have a roll call. Greg, did you want to call that, or? I can call it if you want. Erica? Erica is here. Joe Berry?
Here.
Here. Joey Lax-Salinas is here.
Here.
Carl Mattson? Kelly?
Here.
Here, okay. And Rob, can you hear us?
I'm here.
Good.
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm here.
Wonderful. And Adam Robertson?
I'm here.
Thank you. I did not get minutes back unless that Margaret handed. All right, so we did not get any minutes back from the last meeting, so what we'll do is postpone that for the next time. But our business tonight is, what I decided to do is to get our entire group familiar on what TIF is, which is a tax increment financing. And for the people listening or watching at home that can hear us, we'd like to just do brief discussions on this. We're not going to get too in-depth because there is another meeting tonight. But I do have handouts for each and every one of you that you can pick up by Margaret. I'll leave a copy in the office and she can make more copies on that. So on the first part of new business here, we're going to have Craig, our town manager, talk a little bit about what a TIF is, what a redevelopment agreement is, and then what our TIF districts are in St. John, so that you guys can all get familiarized yourself with what these projects that we're talking about. And then also, if we do have time, we'll get into a little bit about how they're funded. And so I'm going to turn this part of it over to Craig, and maybe he can explain a few of those things to us. So.
All right, so a tax increment financing district, tax increment financing, first of all, is a method that municipalities in Indiana can use to make improvements within certain districts within the community. So the, in this case, in the case of St. John, the town council determines determines that it's appropriate to establish a district and passes the appropriate resolutions and ordinances to create a district. In our case, we have gone through a series of creations of districts and combinations of districts to ultimately now we have two districts, one for the US 41 area and one along US 231. Kind of known as TIF 1 and TIF 2, depending on what paperwork we're looking at. But essentially what happens is this area is determined and the town is allowed to capture the taxes within those districts above a base level. So basically, there's a base tax rate that's established the day that the district is established, and everything that occurs in terms of increase in value from that date forward through development that takes place is captured in the form of what's called increment. So that difference between today's value and the value at the time that the district was established is called the increment. State law requires that the increment is invested back into that same area or in projects that benefit that area. There are some cases where you might be able to make some improvements outside of a TIF district as long as you can prove that the investment is a benefit to the TIF district itself. And so TIF is administered and regulated by the Redevelopment Commission, so they determine how the increment that's collected is reinvested back into that district, and that most often that's in the form of capital projects, and it's things like road improvements, investments in developments that come into the community. We've obviously done both types of projects using our TIF. The most obvious example we can think of most recently would be the Shops 96 project and the West 96 improvements, along with US 41 improvements at that intersection. But basically, it's an economic development tool that allows us to capture a larger portion of the property tax within the area that the district is, within the district boundaries, the district that's determined. So we can reinvest those back into that area for the purpose of economic development. Or in the case of an area that is blighted, basically bringing an area that perhaps is a little, a little in need of economic redevelopment to see reinvestment back into those areas. And so, that's kind of TIF in a nutshell. I don't know if you want me to go into anything with regard to the specifics on the redevelopment commission.
Yeah, always there's a question, Craig, that the schools feel like when we have TIF agreements, the schools feel like they're missing out on funding for the schools. And if you get through the project, they realize that there's more funding for a lot of these schools. But maybe you can speak to that on an experience that maybe you have had.
Well, that's a little bit of a that's a little bit of an interesting topic.
There's a lot of
It used to be that TIF districts captured more revenues from schools than they do currently.
Right.
As it stands now, the only revenues that are taken away from schools are capital revenues, specific type of capital revenues. But there are provisions in state statute that allow communities to pass some of those funds back through to the schools in the form of either technology improvements or investments and that sort of thing. Now, I've been personally involved in two other communities in having worked with the redevelopment commission, alongside the redevelopment commission in Valparaiso, and having been the executive director of the redevelopment commission in Michigan City previously. Both of those communities had provided opportunities for the districts that fell within the TIF districts, the school districts whose boundaries were within the TIF districts that were established, to basically apply for and receive funding to make those capital types of improvements or technology types of improvements within the schools. So there are tools that are available to help offset the burden of any sort of reduction in the revenues that the schools would immediately feel as a result of that. So in both of those communities, we did just that. And for example, I know in the case of both Valparaiso and Michigan City, there were substantial investments made in basically helping bring classrooms up to date and having cutting edge technology available for students and teachers and administrators. For example, in Michigan City, the Redevelopment Commission was able to purchase both software as well as training necessary to bring all the students up to a one-to-one situation with regard to each student having access to a take-home device, Chromebook or tablet or something of that nature, as well as smart technology within the classroom, whether it's smart boards or other technology in the classroom itself, and the training that the teachers needed to be able to operate those devices.
So
So
that's a benefit that
yeah,
they
that's just one
received out of that
example. That's
TIF.
one example how communities have worked with school districts, with regard to tax increment financing. But at the end of the day, there's also a feeling perhaps that if we were to pass back through some of the assessed value that's collected within the TIF district back to the schools, that they would be, they would see this windfall all of a sudden. And that's just not true, because what's passed back through is assessed value. And so the return on investment is not one-to-one. It's a much lesser percentage than it would be if you were able to invest directly the funds that you collect into some of those improvements for the schools.
So it's really a benefit.
Yes.
I mean, it's really.
Well, and then there's the added benefit of the additional economic development for your community, which benefits the schools as well.
Now,
If
the-
more heads in the, in the classrooms because of growth in your community, because your community is more attractive and people want to invest in it, is a benefit to the schools as well.
So that TIF committee can control those funds and decide,
Well, redevelopment commission.
the redevelopment commission would control those funds, or the committee.
Correct.
To put those funds to the best use that they have in front of them, I would say,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
good. Is there any drawbacks to a TIF? Because I have people ask sometimes, what could be a drawback? I always thought it was a benefit. But some folks don't like what's happening with expansion. So they say, well, what are we doing this for? And is it a drawback for a business that's been in the community and doesn't get any funds, and a new business coming in gets some funds,
I mean, there may be cases where somebody's property might not be located in the TIF district, and, they feel like they're perhaps not getting the same benefit as somebody who is located within the TIF district. So I suppose the drawback is that, it may be a little bit easier in the case of St. John because our commercial development largely is limited to 2 corridors, maybe in one smaller other area, but it's a lot easier to provide, for those opportunities to most of the property owners that would benefit from TIF dollars in our community as it would be perhaps in another community where there's a lot more commercial areas to serve and that sort of thing. And one of the other misnomers is that TIF is that TIF can be used in residential areas, and that's not true. The only case in which residential can come into play with regard to the use of TIF is when there's a mixed-use development where there's already commercial involved in the property as well.
Right.
And so the dollars that are collected can't be used to benefit residential areas. So it's purely an economic development tool meant for further investment in commercial and industrial, non-residential districts within the community.
And I know we're seeing a lot of construction and redevelopment on 41 across from shops of 96, and that's a real benefit to get that road wider and a light there, and I think people will appreciate that down the road.
Yeah, a little bit of suffering for the time being for a lot of benefit later on.
Right, right.
So positioning ourselves better for additional economic development opportunities.
Any of the board members have any questions? Yes, sir.
Now, when you
Please
give
state your name so everybody.
Joe
can-
Barry, when you give the TIF in a redevelopment agreement, you're only exercising just the increment, not any town funds or anything like that?
Just increment.
Just the increment that's captured above that base tax, like I said, that was in place.
I mean, so you only have X amount of dollars you can actually use to go
Correct.
into the redevelopment agreement?
Correct.
Okay.
Anybody else have a question for Craig, or any questions on new developments that may be coming up?
Yeah, this is Rob.
And a
Miller.
doggy
We're
in
looking
there?
to establish Are we looking to establish a new TIP district?
Did we lose her?
I heard something about establishing a new TIF district. Is that what was?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Rob Godoy. Are we looking to establish a new TIP district?
We haven't discussed the establishment of any new TIF districts. It's possible to do so under certain circumstances, but we haven't ever discussed the addition of any new TIF districts at this point. It's also possible to expand existing districts, but again, we have not discussed that at this point, to my knowledge.
Because as the corridor increases with businesses going south in town limits, it might be a possibility.
It is possible to expand districts, and that would be a decision that the town council would have to make ultimately.
Isn't it got to be contiguous as well, when you expand it?
If you expand a district, it has to be contiguous, yes. New district doesn't have to be, but an expansion does.
Now,
And essentially, expansion these days, it used to be different, but an expansion is basically, goes through about the same process as the creation of a new district would.
Craig, the length of our TIF districts, or the duration of the TIF, that's 25 years now, or 20 years?
The maximum amount of time that a new TIF district can be set for would be 25 years.
Right. And then I know that there's some towns that made them only for 10 years to recapture, and then what happens, if they get that money in sooner, then they retire those bonds, is
They
that
can,
correct?
yes. They can choose to do that.
Anyone else have another question? I do have a wonderful study packet that you guys can really inform yourself on. I put together a lot of good information here. It's something that we've done in the past, and I think it's just good that you familiarize yourself with what we have. It's if you get a question from somebody, or if we have a lead on something in town, at least we can talk reasonably on it, and then turn it over to Craig for his advice on how to handle any certain
Well,
situation.
and I guess just add, just real quickly, one of the other tools that we have with the use of TIF is that it's possible, depending on the size of a project, for a project to come in and for the redevelopment commission to pledge some of the revenues that would be anticipated from that development back into either that development or the TIF district itself.
Yep.
And so those funds can be leveraged in different ways. And so it's not just about using the funds that are available on hand, but the potential for the leveraging of future revenues anticipated, depending on the situation and in the right circumstances, that can be done. So that's another tool that we might be able to use in the future, to help enhance economic development.
Any other questions from the board members? Come on, guys, you gotta help me out here a little bit. You gotta be wondering about some of these things. Okay, Craig, thank you for that input on that, and then.
Try to say something, he's muted.
Oh, we're missing somebody here?
I think Joey was trying to.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry. I think I was on mute. For our current TIF district, you said it was 41 and 231 corridor. Is it the entire corridor from the north side of town to the south side, or is it is it only a certain length of it, or?
No, so there are parts of both sides of the road that are in and parts of both sides of the road that are out. It just depends, it's kind of a jagged line on both sides of the road. The certain properties are in and certain properties are out. The determination was made at the time the district was established, what the boundaries needed to be. And you would have to actually look at a map to see which parcels are in and which parcels are out. It's not easy to explain because, it's just not, there's not a uniformity or consistency to it necessarily. It jumps on both sides of the road in the case
Sure.
of 41. In the case of 231, obviously the town limits are primarily on the north side of 231. So the majority of that TIF is on the north side, but there is a sliver, I believe, on the south side as well, to a certain depth, and I don't remember the exact depth, but 600
Okay.
feet. And so that stretches roughly from Parish to Klein, as I recall. So,
Okay, gotcha.
yeah.
Can you all see that map that,
Oh yeah. So here's the
Jason
map. So you can
brought
see you can see what I'm talking about. It
Yep.
jumps back and forth on both sides of the. Do you have it up? It jumps back and forth on both sides of US 41.
You should be able to see the map now.
Yeah, it's starting to load.
so as you guys can see, there's a lot of developable ground or opportunities up 41 that we should all be actively having our ears open if somebody's interested to bring it to Craig, and then he can pass it on. But there's opportunities here in St. John. Now, one of the other opportunities that we're playing with here in economic development is the waterway, so we can possibly
Yes.
And maybe, Craig, if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll
see
just
how-
give you a
how
brief.
far we come up on
I'll just give
that.
you a brief update. At our last meeting, we talked about the possibility of exploring a riverfront liquor license district based on West Creek. So that would be the area, obviously, on the south end of the TIF district. And so, in just an effort to collect information about that and explore whether that's possible or not, I did reach out to our town attorney. We had a brief conversation, and we are working on setting up an appointment to discuss with our bond counsel that works with the redevelopment commission, just to explore further whether that's feasible or not. And there's a very specific process involved in the establishment of a district like that, and it would have to be in conjunction with a certain amount of investment on the part of the redevelopment commission within a certain proximity of the creek, in the form of what's referred to as a redevelopment project in the proximity of in this case, possibly West Creek. So I don't have much more to report on that yet, but I have, like I said, I have started to explore that with our attorneys, and hopefully have more information for the committee soon.
Awesome.
If that was possible, then, Craig, is it possible to get liquor licenses that the restaurants are looking for? Because the biggest information that we had when we did our survey is the community and the residents are looking for more dining in the town, and that's a big requirement for these restaurants that may come in.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, if the district is established, it allows for the issuance, the recommendation to the Alcoholic Beverage Commission for the issuance of additional liquor license, three-way liquor licenses within the town.
And who controls that then?
Those are controlled by the Alcoholic Beverage Commission.
Yep.
And
And is that in Indianapolis or is that in town here?
I believe there's one for Lake County. I don't know the map off the top of my head, but there are different, basically, districts. And what would happen is, whoever the body is that, if this were to be established, the town council would deem either itself or another body to be in charge of making the recommendations to the Alcohol Beverage Commission. And those would be able to be, like I said, issued for, those would be for the issuance of three-way liquor licenses. Now, like I said, it's a very specific process that would have to be gone through to do that, but
And how do they determine a price on that?
that's where things get different, okay? So, these are sometimes unpopular because
Yep.
you're essentially renting, for the lack of a better term, the property owner essentially ends up renting that license for that specific property. So it's not a commodity that a property owner can then take and trade or, leverage like they would if they actually owned that license. So these would not be, these would not be subject to the same costs as a regular three-way liquor license would be, because they're not owned by the individual. They're essentially borrowed. And a very, very small annual cost associated with those as a result. And so sometimes those are unpopular with existing tavern owners as a result, because they've spent the money, in certain cases, a significant amount of money to acquire those licenses, and whether purchasing them directly from someone else or through the process that the state goes through to issue those.
So if they buy a license themselves, does that have to stay with that property, or if they decide to build somewhere else in the community, can that license travel with them?
An existing license holder
Yes.
can transfer that to another property, can sell that to another individual.
Got it.
It's just, it's a license that can be used within the town limits in
Got it.
this case. However, with this type of license, it goes with the property, it stays with the property for that specific use, and cannot be transferred, cannot be sold, goes away if the property owner moves, the business owner moves. So
Got it.
it's a different animal altogether.
All right.
So,
That's something that's more enticing to a business that, more commercial, like a steakhouse, like a Fogo de Chao, or like a more franchised steakhouse, something like that. that would move in, operate on an unset amount of years, but would be renting it at a better price. So once they decided if they wanted to move out, they wouldn't have to worry about that.
It's also used by, it's also often used by local purveyors. So I think that's actually, it's used by both. Both local owners and operators of establishments and like you said, sometimes the chains. You basically, when the district is established, you're also allowed to set the rules by which applications are considered and the criteria that are considered when, looking at the issuance of those licenses. So there's some control that's allowed by the town in determining what the issuance of those licenses is. For example, the situation in both of the communities that I worked in previously that have them. In the case of Valparaiso, it's not a riverfront license, but it's a historic district license, this district that they have. And in Michigan City, a riverfront licensed district. There are specific rules as to the minimum amount of investment that needs to be made into the facility where the license would be used, and some sort of a history of having operated a similar type of establishment and that sort of thing, and a certain amount of receipts that have to be collected through the sale of food items and not just alcohol. So there are different ways you can structure that, and we would look at the guidance of, obviously, our attorneys to help us craft that ultimately based on the desires of, whoever's involved in the process of putting that together, and ultimately the town council, of course. So it can be crafted to whatever situation best fits the community.
Any more
Hey,
questions?
this is
Yep.
Erica.
Yeah, Erica.
Yes. So, quick question. So, in the past, I know one of the major concerns from, like you said earlier, residents is, the lack of restaurants, etc. But I feel like, there's been many discussions with restaurants before, and, I think the concern was the proximity to other cities like Cherville that has, a lot of different restaurants. Do you think that something like this would entice those types of places to now come? Was that one of the big reasons because of the, liquor licensing and et cetera, as to why they haven't come here, in the past?
Well, I think part of the reason is, as I understand it, there's a limit on the number of available licenses in our community. Now, we do anticipate hopefully getting
Couple more.
a couple more of those when the census comes out, because there's a per certain number of residents, basically you're issued a new license. I believe it may have changed now, but I believe it's 1,500 per 1,500 residents. So, and they only do that when the new census numbers are issued. So then the state will make a new number of licenses available through some process, whether it's a lottery or some sort of application process. I don't know how they'll handle that. But the limitation on St. John, from what I understand, is that there were very few, if any, licenses available on the open market.
Okay.
Through the number that are available to our community through that population, through our existing population. So the last time they were issued based on about 14,000 and some change inhabitants in St. John. This time it'll be based on whatever the new number, at the final count for the census ends up being when it's all said and done. They'll make a certain number of new licenses available on the market through the process with the state. What we're talking about here is separate from that. And again,
Okay.
once those rules are once those rules are established, then, based on those criteria that are set by the town.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments for Craig? Nope. All right, members, do we have any updates from members, any member reports? that you want to give the committee? Joe?
Not here.
Okay. No? Joey? Erica? Kelly?
No?
Okay. Tonight, we have no public comments, so if a resident wants to get in touch with any board member here, they will send an email, and Jason will retrieve it and pass it along. So that's all I have for tonight. I have these pamphlets. Just remember, there's a lot of great information in them. I want each and every one of you to have one. Craig did a great job. I thank him for going through that with you. There's always something to learn on these TIF agreements, redevelopment agreements. They're all different. We have also in the room Paul Panzak, who is our liaison tonight for the town council, and Paul has a comment for us. So, Paul, thank you.
Hi, everyone. And yeah, Brian's your official liaison. He's present as well, but I thought I'd come as well and talk on a few matters. Erica brought up about restaurants. Liquor license is probably not the biggest concern right now. The biggest concern is traffic counts, car counts. We just don't have the traffic. Business goes where business is. So that's problem number one. No amount of incentive is going to have a business open if they're not going to be able to sustain. And part of that is that St. John is a bedroom community. So we have no daytime lunch crowd, which really hurts as far as getting higher end establishments. Folks want a Bonefish Grill or a Cooper's Hawk or a, Outback. They're just not gonna come. Even if they have the traffic counts, if they can't fill their tables at lunchtime, it's not a profitable model. So what you will see is an influx of fast food. Fast food's always the first to explore into a town. They have a tight model to work with. They know they can make money morning, noon, night, and they make it work, especially with the drive-through. That's why we have so many fast food restaurants, because it's profitable for them to come here. So no amount of incentive is going to bring those other businesses, except for more traffic counts. And hopefully in the future there could be more jobs in town, perhaps more professional jobs. Those type of things would spur that restaurant development. They would follow in. So I wanted to speak to that a little bit. It's definitely a tough market for that right now. Shops 96 is everything. Retail's really tough right now. Expansion's really tough. Going back to the TIF discussion, I did want to speak to that just for a minute. Just in a nutshell, in layman's terms, TIF takes all the money, the tax money raised by real estate taxes in one area, and puts it in a piggy bank that the town could then spend to spur redevelopment in that same area. And the question that when I was taught about TIF that you need to ask is, there's a really important question to ask before we invest any money, is that spending this money, would this development happen without it? So it's the but for this it wouldn't happen question. And a good example of that is the old lumber yard and Malt Brothers and those homes. It was not profitable to collect all those properties and redevelop them. So without the town's intervention, it likely would have sat that way another 10, 15 years. So,
And it's an eyesore when it's blighted like it was.
I know some are for it, some are against it, but I can tell you this, it would have sat just the way it is. It wouldn't have changed. So one last thing, John asked about town council direction. You guys are eager to work. I appreciate you all volunteering for this job, coming on the board. And probably we hit on a lot of the wants of residents here tonight. One of the things that we as a council are trying to concentrate on is the redevelopment end of things. And of course, we are the redevelopment commission and we're working that. We have a lot of ideas. But as an economic development commission, you may be able to work hand in hand with us somewhat, because these new businesses will drive to St. John, look around, maybe think about coming here, but see the blight or the older development that doesn't look as attractive and maybe decide not to locate here. So redevelopment is really important, and I'm going to throw a carrot out here. something possibly to work on. So last year, I kicked this around. I've talked to a few fellow councilmen about this, the potential to do some sort of and this is, by the way, something for existing business in town. Some sort of a facade improvement program. You have a lot of businesses on 41 that are very strong. They're mom and pop. They're established. But maybe their old sign is giant and rusty and falling apart, and there's no landscaping or none of the beauty that new developments have. So there's a potential that if the redevelopment commission would entertain it, that we can come up with some kind of a facade improvement program, some kind of a matching program. So in Schererville, when I was on their plan commission, we worked with this a little bit, and they came up with an improvement program for their downtown. If somebody wanted to improve their storefront up to a certain amount, the town would kick in 50-50 up to a set amount. And we're not talking about a lot of money in the big scheme of things, but let's say you have a place like the St. John Mall. It's old, right? I mean, it's clean, it's kept, but it's old. It doesn't have the beautiful landscaping in front like the new developments have. It doesn't, the sign isn't attractive. Well, maybe they'd like to improve it, and maybe that's something the town could work around some parameters and come up with an improvement program where, let's say, a place like that can say, oh yeah, we'll improve our property if we can work together on this. So maybe that's something that you guys can kick around at your next meeting, is see if businesses in town would support something like that, and what kind of parameters or things that help they might look for. I think specifically about landscaping and signs in our town. We really don't have like storefronts per se. Most of the buildings are pretty well kept. It's more the 41 corridor that residents keep clamoring to have improved. They drive 41 and they say it looks awful. And that is mostly landscaping and signage when it comes to the old developments. So there's something you could maybe work with.
All right, we'll definitely try to come up with a few things, and then we'll present it to that commission. And Paul, thank you for sitting in. Brian, thank you for being with us also here. Can you still hear us, Brian?
I think he dropped off.
Did he drop off? Okay. All right. I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So,
Aye.
In favor.
okay, meeting adjourned.